Hello, my name is Jae-eun Shin, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Augmented Reality Research Center at KAIST. Our paper is titled How Space is Told, Linking Trajectory, Narrative, and Intent in Augmented Reality Storytelling for Cultural Heritage Sites. Storytelling is an important strategy for AR cultural heritage applications because they connect individually augmented information to form a continuous narrative that enables immersive spatial experiences on site. For this reason, research has mostly focused on the outcome of AR storytelling as a designed experience for visitors, rather than on the process of creating narratives with authorial intent. This has undermined the potential of AR storytelling as a creative medium for authors taking inspiration from cultural heritage sites. It also led to authoring tools lacking in consideration of spatial and narrative parameters that cater directly to the author's needs and interests. Therefore, we present a multiple case study aimed to develop author-supportive tools for AR storytelling at cultural heritage sites. Using our own prototype, we observed how 22 participants created AR stories for one of 3 outdoor sites. We analyzed the process and its outcome to uncover patterns and links between authorial intent, trajectory, narrative, and the function of the stories. Our study provides a thorough understanding of how space is told through AR from the author's standpoint, and reflects the findings in design guidelines for AR authoring tools to support the creative process. Authorship refers to the right to execute intention and agency in creating narratives. For interactive digital storytelling, much of this authorship has transferred from a single omniscient creator to the audience's user. Site-specific AR storytelling elevates the status of the audience's user to audience's author, as it requires active physical and mental engagement of the end user to implement an augmented narrative in the surrounding real space, and ultimately transform it into an embodied experience. A key characteristic of computer-mediated communication and digital storytelling, spatiality as a concept took a turn for the literal from its originally metaphorical use with the introduction of mobile and AR technology, as virtual narrative spaces took physical forms by merging with the real world. For this reason, both the geographic and semantic attributes of physical spaces that narrative spaces are connected to are central to site-specific AR storytelling. Regarding narrativity, placeness, assume of 3 Rs, remediation, and intermediality are theoretical concepts that we applied to the development of our authoring tool and analysis of the authored stories. Placeness is the unique quality of a certain space that is leveraged through reinforcing, remembering, and reskinning as AR storytelling strategies. Remediation is the way in which new media makes use of existing ones, which occurs in various instances of intermediality. A survey of authoring tools for site-specific AR storytelling revealed that over the past 2 decades, they have evolved from not having any regard for the medium as a creative means to considering the authoring process in their designs. However, none of them have focused on the author's needs and intent, nor the relationship between spatiality and narrativity. Against this background, we sought to identify patterns in the intent, trajectory, and narrative of site-specific AR stories for cultural heritage sites. We also wished to uncover whether intent had an impact on these other components. To answer our questions, we first determined the format of stories to be collected and analyzed in our study and called the process space-telling, which is the act of mapping a linear narrative to a corresponding spatial trajectory through the remediation and connection of multimedia content in AR at specific GPS coordinates. We defined units of spatiality and narrativity in parallel hierarchies to look into their differences and relationships in the authoring process. Based on this format, we developed an authoring system prototype consisting of a database with a metadata schema defining spatial and narrative properties of all the content used and created, a server transferring the data, and a web-based authoring tool with which the stories were created. The authoring tool employed a 3D map interface that guided the author through a 5-step authoring process. In the first step, the author would search for and select a desired target site on the map. Second, the author understands the site's placeness by surveying the geotag content registered to corresponding locations. The author would then proceed to plan the spatial and narrative parameters for the story, such as expected duration, number of POIs to be used, title of story, and outline. In the fourth step, the author would engage in the actual process of selecting geotag content as authoring points for a certain POI, connecting them as POI content that would again be connected to form a space-telling content. Finally, the author is able to review the outcome as a spatial trajectory on the map and go back to the previous steps if changes are needed. With this authoring tool, we conducted a multiple case study where 22 participants each created space-telling content for one of 3 pre-designated Korean cultural heritage sites. The sites were chosen on account of differences in their spatial and narrative attributes to ensure that potential patterns would not be affected by a certain type of placeness. The study consisted of a walkthrough of the tool, a 40-minute authoring session at minimum, and post-study interviews. The participants had varying levels of expertise in storytelling and familiarity with AR. We collected data from the 22 cases for thematic analysis aimed at uncovering their authorial intent, spatial trajectory, and narrative composition. For authorial intent, we identified 2 patterns, narrative delivery and spatial exploration. For narrative delivery, the author's priority was on making use of spatiality to best express the storyscape of a chosen site. After surveying the storyscape, authors tended to choose sites with narrative elements they were attracted to or were familiar with. On the other hand, those with the intent to explore space considered using narrative as a means to present spatiality, and chose sites on account of their physical features. The trajectories of space-telling were either confined or encompassing. Confined trajectories occupied partial regions over less than half of the POIs in a chosen site, and encompassing trajectories spanned the entire area for more than half of its POIs. While the narrative sequence determined the form of confined trajectories, physical proximity between the POIs was the decisive factor for encompassing trajectories. The 2 patterns found for narrative composition were progressive and thematic. Progressive narratives formed a clear story arc in a linear order that was elaborately planned and executed. In these cases, choosing authoring points and POIs were most important for the authors, as they determined the narrative sequence for fictional tales and historical retellings. Thematic narratives consisted of content segments in a binding theme that were loosely planned and improvised. The authors focused on choosing a theme that suited the space to create an effective trajectory for tour guides, games, and trivia. By linking patterns found for intent, trajectory, and narrative to Azuma's 3 R's as the functions each story served, we were able to identify 2 dominant branches of space-telling as either story-centric or space-centric. In story-centric space-telling, confined trajectories told progressive narratives that served to invoke or transform the placeness of the target site for narrative delivery. In space-centric storytelling, encompassing trajectories were linked to thematic content that reinforced placeness for spatial exploration. With space-centric space-telling, authors sought to enhance narrative engagement through space and actively created their own geotag content for spatialized narratives. Confined trajectories minimize the effect of spatial and temporal breaks that hinder engagement, which is also why many authoring points were used for few POIs. In space-centric space-telling, authors wanted to enhance spatial engagement through the stories they told, and mostly chose to remediate existing geotag content for a narrativized space. Encompassing trajectories serve to support spatial understanding of the site as a whole, and authors welcomed breaks in external stimulants to that end by using few authoring points over many POIs. The guidelines we propose based on our analysis are: first, provide templates and AR assets depending on whether it's story or space that the author is focusing on. Second, contextualize spatio-temporal assistance to control or leverage breaks between authoring points and POIs. Third, put the author in the AR user's shoes, as the authors are well aware in their creative process that ultimately, their stories can only be spatially experienced as augmentations in reality. With our study, we conclude that to support the creative process of site-specific AR storytelling, authoring tools should adaptively provide resources and assistance according to what the author intends to emphasize, space or narrative. Thank you for listening, and please refer to our paper for more details.